What happens when a joke crosses the line and unleashes a hidden power no one expects? Elon Musk sat quietly in the courtroom, a man accustomed to the glaring spotlight of the public eye. His posture was relaxed, but his mind was racing. This wasn't just another lawsuit, this wasn't another headline in the long list of controversies that seemed to follow him everywhere. Today, something felt different. There was a weight in the air, a tension hanging in the room that even the hum of the air conditioning couldn't alleviate. The courtroom was filled with the usual cast, lawyers, journalists, and the silent spectators who always seemed to flock to these kinds of events. Everyone was waiting for the trial to begin, the drama to unfold, and yet, no one could have predicted what would happen next. The judge, an older man with graying hair and sharp, angular features, leaned over his bench. He was known for his dry wit and sharp remarks, a characteristic that had earned him both respect and a certain level of disdain. Today, however, the crowd seemed particularly uneasy. The judge was in a mood. He could feel it in the way his eyes scanned the room. And as he caught sight of Elon sitting near the back, his lips curled into a faint smirk. "Well, Mr. Musk," the judge said, his voice breaking through the murmurs in the room. "I have to say, I'm fascinated by your work. You've revolutionized everything from electric cars to space travel. But, let me ask you something." He paused, letting the words sink in. "What's next? Are you planning to invent time travel next, or perhaps a flying car for every man, woman, and child?" The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't a cruel or malicious laugh, it was just a playful comment, a joke meant to lighten the mood. The kind of thing that judges often said to keep the energy in the room from becoming too heavy. But Elon didn't laugh. His face remained stoic, his jaw clenched ever so slightly. It wasn't that he couldn't take a joke. No, that wasn't it. He had heard far worse from the media, from his critics, and even from his own employees. What bothered him wasn't the joke itself, it was the subtle undertone behind it. The dismissive tone. The assumption that his work, his dreams, were nothing more than outlandish ideas unworthy of serious consideration. Elon had spent his life challenging the status quo, daring to dream of a future that others thought impossible. Space travel. Electric cars. Hyperloop. The world had laughed at him before, but he had always proved them wrong. The laughter, the mockery, it had never fazed him. He had learned long ago that true visionaries were never understood in their time. But there was something about today. The way the judge had looked at him, the mocking tone in his voice, the way the crowd had responded. It was as if they couldn't see the value in what he was doing, as if his entire life's work was a joke to them. The thought stung more than he was willing to admit. For a moment, Elon allowed himself to feel the weight of the joke. To feel the sting of being ridiculed. It wasn't something he often allowed himself to do, but today, in this moment, it cut deeper than it ever had before. He had always been an outsider, an innovator, a man who wasn't afraid to stand alone in the pursuit of what others considered impossible. But being reduced to the punchline of a courtroom joke, that felt different. The judge didn't notice. He was already moving on, his attention shifting to the next part of the trial. But Elon's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about the case, the legalities, or the arguments being made. His thoughts drifted to the bigger picture, the people who mocked him, the people who told him he couldn't do it, the people who still didn't believe in what he was trying to accomplish. As the trial continued, Elon's mind wandered to the past. To those early days when he had first set out to change the world. It hadn't been easy. People had doubted him at every turn, called him crazy, told him his ideas were unrealistic. And yet, against all odds, he had persevered. He had proven them wrong. Time and time again. But now, he couldn't help but wonder, how long could he keep going? How long could he continue to fight against the odds, to prove his worth to a world that didn't seem to understand him? And more importantly, who was he really doing it for? Was it for the world? Or was it for something deeper within himself? The words of the judge still echoed in his mind, "Are you planning to invent time travel next?" It seemed like such a trivial thing to say, but in that moment, it felt like a challenge. A challenge to everything he had ever worked for. The idea of being dismissed so casually, as if his life's work were nothing more than a punchline, it was almost too much to bear. But then something strange happened. As the trial progressed, Elon felt a sense of calm wash over him. It was subtle at first, but it grew stronger with each passing minute. He was no longer concerned with the judge's words or the crowd's laughter. He was no longer worried about the public perception of him or his work. He had spent too many years living in the shadow of other people's expectations. Too many years trying to prove himself to a world that didn't understand him. Maybe it was time to stop fighting for approval, he thought. Maybe it was time to stop caring about what other people thought. And then, just as he was about to let the moment pass, something unexpected happened. The judge, who had been so quick to mock him moments earlier, suddenly stopped speaking. His gaze shifted from the courtroom to the back of the room, and a brief silence fell over the crowd. Elon turned to see what had caught the judge's attention, and his heart skipped a beat. It was his father. The man who had always been a mystery to him. The man who had kept his distance, rarely showing emotion, rarely offering support. But today, he was standing in the doorway of the courtroom, his expression unreadable. And then, without a word, he began to walk toward the front of the room. The room was silent. Elon felt his breath catch in his throat. He had never seen his father like this before. His father, the quiet, unassuming figure who had always remained in the background, was now standing at the center of it all. His eyes never left Elon's as he moved forward, each step deliberate, calculated. And then, as if the entire world had frozen in that moment, his father reached the bench. Without a word, he took a seat beside Elon. The judge, stunned, looked from Elon to his father, then back to Elon. But there was nothing he could say. Nothing anyone could say. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what this moment meant, but he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. Something had shifted. Something had changed. And no one, not the judge, not the crowd, could ever take that away from him. In that silence, Elon Musk knew that he was no longer fighting alone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom was still. The eyes of everyone, from the judge to the spectators, were fixed on the scene unfolding before them. For a few seconds, it felt like time itself had slowed down, and all the noise in Elon's mind, the doubts, the distractions, the fleeting thoughts of ridicule, had been drowned out. His father, who had never been a prominent figure in his public life, sat beside him with an air of quiet authority, not uttering a single word. Elon's heart raced as he tried to process what was happening. His father, Elon Musk, a man known for his stoic nature and distant relationship with his son, was finally making a public statement of support. In a place where everything had once seemed hostile, where he had felt alone in the face of the world's judgment, his father's presence felt like an anchor, pulling him back to his roots, reminding him of who he was and where he came from. But the question lingered in Elon's mind, why now? He had grown up with a father who, by most standards, was distant and emotionally unavailable. Errol had always been a man of few words, someone who seemed more comfortable with his own thoughts than with engaging in any real conversation. For years, Elon had struggled to understand his father's actions, or lack thereof. In the early days, he had longed for a more involved relationship, but it was never to be. His father's indifference, coupled with his complex personality, left Elon feeling like an outsider within his own family. Elon's relationship with his father had always been strained. As a child, he had been rebellious, constantly seeking approval and recognition from a man who seemed to offer neither. As a teenager, he had begun to distance himself from Errol, frustrated by the emotional walls his father had built around himself. But despite the years of estrangement, Elon couldn't deny the influence Errol had had on him. After all, it was his father who had instilled in him the value of perseverance, of thinking beyond the ordinary, even if it was never directly spoken. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon had seen his father in action. Elon Musk was a successful engineer, and his accomplishments were undeniable. He had built a strong business empire in the mining industry and had an eye for opportunities others overlooked. But for all his success, Errol was not a warm or affectionate man. He was hard, focused, and, at times, a little too cold for Elon's liking. Elon had often wondered if the emotional distance between them was what pushed him to seek out other forms of validation in his adult life. Perhaps it was the lack of approval from his father that made him so determined to prove himself to the world. Maybe that's why, even now, he found it so difficult to fully embrace his own success. His father's legacy was always present, but it had never been a legacy of affection or emotional connection. It was one of calculated ambition and relentless drive. The moment Errol entered the courtroom and sat beside him without uttering a word, it felt like everything Elon had spent his life fighting against had come full circle. The stoicism, the emotional withdrawal, the lack of support, it was all there. But in that silence, there was something else too. Something that Elon hadn't anticipated. Errol's presence wasn't a simple act of kindness or support. It was a statement. A statement that, despite everything, despite their fractured relationship, Elon Musk was acknowledging something far deeper than any words could express. There was a legacy here, one of strength, resilience, and unspoken understanding. And in that moment, Elon realized that maybe he had underestimated his father all these years. His thoughts were interrupted by the judge's voice, which cut through the tension in the room. "Mr. Musk, I wasn't expecting this. Is there something you'd like to share with the court?" the judge stammered, still unsure of how to respond to the unexpected presence of Elon Musk. Elon looked at his father, who remained silent, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, Elon considered speaking, but something told him not to. Something about this moment felt sacred, as if the silence itself held more power than any words could. "No," Elon said quietly, his voice steady, his gaze still locked on his father. "There's nothing I need to say." The judge nodded, though he was clearly confused. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, unsure of how to proceed, but the moment had already shifted. The air in the courtroom had changed, and it wasn't just because of the presence of one of the most enigmatic men in Elon's life. It was something deeper, a realization that something had awakened inside Elon, a part of him that had long been dormant. As the trial continued, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting within him. It wasn't just the events of the courtroom or the trial itself, it was his relationship with his father, a relationship that, for so long, had been defined by distance and misunderstanding. Today, it was different. Today, it felt like there was a glimmer of something new. After the session concluded and the room began to empty, Elon and Errol sat in silence for a few moments. The room around them was buzzing with chatter, but the two of them remained still. It was as if time had stopped, and for the first time, father and son were in the same space, connected not by words but by something far more powerful. Finally, Elon broke the silence. "Why now?" he asked, his voice quiet but tinged with curiosity. Errol looked at him, his expression still unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, and then, almost imperceptibly, he spoke. "Sometimes, the past isn't about what was said. It's about what wasn't," Errol said softly. "I don't need to tell you that, Elon. You've always known." Elon didn't respond immediately. He let his father's words settle into his mind, and for the first time in a long while, he realized the truth of them. All his life, he had been trying to make sense of what his father had never said, what he had never done. But maybe that was the lesson: sometimes, silence could be more powerful than any words. As they stood up to leave the courtroom together, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of clarity wash over him. For years, he had sought approval, validation, and understanding from a world that had never truly embraced him. But perhaps that was the wrong approach. Perhaps, like his father, he needed to find strength in silence, in action, in the things that spoke louder than words ever could. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The lesson that the strength of a man, like the strength of a legacy, often comes not from what is spoken, but from what is lived. And as he walked out of the courtroom with his father by his side, Elon Musk felt something shift within him. He wasn't just the man who had revolutionized technology and space travel. He was also a son, a man who, after all these years, was beginning to understand what it truly meant to carry his father's legacy. In that moment, he knew that the journey he was on was far from over. It had only just begun. The cool air of the evening felt like a stark contrast to the warmth of the courtroom as Elon Musk walked beside his father. The sounds of the busy city streets outside were muffled by the silence between them, a silence that had always defined their relationship. But tonight, the silence didn't feel like a barrier, it felt like a bridge, a space where understanding could finally begin to take root. They walked in step with each other, neither saying a word, yet both understanding that something had shifted. The tension of the day had passed, replaced by an unspoken understanding that something had begun to heal. It was as if the years of emotional distance, of misunderstandings and miscommunications, had finally found a moment to settle. Elon wasn't sure what had changed, but in the presence of his father, he felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for so long. As they approached the car, Errol broke the silence. "You've done well, Elon," he said, his voice low and calm. "I know you don't hear it from me often, but it's true." Elon stopped in his tracks, taken aback by the rare words of praise. He had always known that his father's way of showing approval was subtle, almost imperceptible, but this was different. This wasn't a passing comment. This was something deeper, something real. "I never needed you to say it," Elon replied, his voice soft but steady. "I've always known." Errol gave him a small nod, his eyes studying Elon with a certain intensity that spoke volumes. "You never did. That's why you've gone so far." The words hung in the air as they got into the car and drove off into the quiet night. Elon sat back in the seat, reflecting on what his father had said. There was a weight to those words, a recognition of the years of struggle and success, of battles fought and won without the need for validation. Errol's words weren't just about approval, they were about acknowledgement. And in that moment, Elon realized that acknowledgement was all he had ever truly needed. For years, he had lived in the shadow of his own ambitions, constantly pushing forward, relentlessly pursuing his vision. It was that drive that had led him to where he was today. But it wasn't until now that he understood something deeper. His pursuit wasn't just about changing the world or proving others wrong, it was about reconciling his own sense of self, about finding peace in the space between his desires and his father's silence. As the car moved through the city, Elon's thoughts wandered back to the days of his youth. Growing up in South Africa, his world had always been one of contradictions. On the one hand, he had been surrounded by wealth, by a father who had built a successful business empire. But on the other hand, he had always felt like an outsider in his own family. His father, Errol, had always been a man of few words, a figure who was both admired and feared. His mother, May, had been the more nurturing presence, but even she had struggled to connect with Errol. The Musk family had been anything but ordinary. They were a family defined by strength, but also by emotional distance. There had been love, of course, love in the form of actions rather than words. Errol had always provided for his family, ensured they were comfortable, and given them the freedom to pursue their own interests. But love, in the sense of emotional connection, had always been harder to come by. Elon's earliest memories were of him sitting in the back seat of a car, gazing out the window as his father drove, his mind racing with thoughts of what could be, what should be. He had always been a dreamer, a thinker, but those dreams had never seemed to align with his father's vision. Errol had been pragmatic, focused on the present, on making money and building a legacy, while Elon had always been focused on the future, on changing the world. And though they had never spoken of it directly, that divide had created a chasm between them, a divide that Elon had spent his life trying to bridge. It wasn't until much later in life that Elon realized the impact of those early years. He began to see that the drive to innovate, to challenge the status quo, wasn't just something that came from within him, it was something that had been passed down through the generations. His father, for all his faults, had instilled in him a certain resilience, a certain toughness that had helped him endure the countless obstacles he had faced. It was a legacy of strength, but it was also a legacy of silence. Now, as he sat in the car next to Errol, Elon understood something new. His father's silence wasn't a rejection, it was a form of strength. It was a way of letting him go, of giving him the freedom to find his own path. It wasn't the approval Elon had once craved, but it was something even more profound, the freedom to be himself, to chart his own course without being tethered to anyone's expectations. Elon thought back to the many moments in his life when he had felt alone in his pursuit, when he had questioned whether anyone truly believed in him. The press had mocked him, competitors had tried to sabotage his success, and even his closest friends had sometimes doubted his vision. But in those moments of isolation, he had never given up. Instead, he had drawn strength from the quiet knowledge that he was on the right path, that the work he was doing, the dreams he was chasing, were worth every ounce of effort. It was in those quiet moments, when no one was watching, that Elon had found the courage to keep going. And now, sitting beside his father, he realized that the quiet strength he had always sought in others had always been there, within him. It had been within his father all along, and it had been passed down to him. As the car made its way through the city, Elon knew that this was a turning point. The courtroom joke, the words of mockery, the doubts from the world, they all seemed insignificant now. What mattered was the quiet power of resilience, of legacy, and of understanding. It was a power that couldn't be shaken by the opinions of others, a power that came from within. And as the car pulled into the driveway of the family home, Elon felt a sense of peace settle over him. He wasn't just the man who had built Tesla and SpaceX. He was also a son, carrying with him the strength of his father's silence, the weight of his family's legacy, and the quiet understanding that sometimes, the most powerful moments in life are the ones where no words are spoken. In the days that followed, the trial would fade into the background, and the world would move on to the next headline, the next controversy. But for Elon Musk, this moment with his father was something far more significant. It was a turning point, a realization that his legacy wasn't just about the companies he had built or the rockets he had launched. It was about the quiet, unspoken strength that had been passed down through the generations, and it was something he would carry with him, always. The future, Elon knew, would be shaped not just by his innovations, but by the quiet power of the legacy he had inherited. A legacy of resilience, of quiet strength, and of a love that had always been there, even in the silence. The days following the courtroom were filled with an uneasy silence between Elon and his father, but it was a silence that felt strangely comforting. For years, Elon had lived in the shadow of his own relentless ambition, and the weight of constantly seeking approval had finally started to lift. He hadn't realized just how much he had been carrying until he began to set it down. As the world continued to turn and the media moved on to their next big story, Elon found himself lost in thought. The courtroom experience had been far more than just a legal battle or a public spectacle. It had been a wake-up call, an invitation to reassess what truly mattered. It wasn't about proving himself to the world or even about achieving the next big thing. It was about understanding himself, his family, and the quiet legacies that shaped him. His phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with the name of Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX. The two had been working closely together for years, but even so, Elon didn't answer the call right away. He was still processing the events of the past few days, still trying to come to terms with the way his relationship with his father had shifted in the span of a few hours. But the call persisted, and after a moment's hesitation, Elon answered. "Hey, Gwynne. What's up?" "Elon, we've got some things to discuss," Gwynne said, her voice clipped and efficient, as always. "There's been a lot of noise in the press, and I think we need to address it. I'm hearing rumors that you're distracted. People are talking about your headspace and how it might be affecting your work." Elon let out a slow breath, sitting back in his chair. He had known this conversation was coming. In the world of SpaceX, there was little room for personal distractions, and Gwyn, who was always a steady force at the company, wouldn't hesitate to bring things to light when she thought they were affecting the business. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice firm, but with a tinge of exhaustion. "Everything is fine, Gwyn. Just a lot going on. You know how it is." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Elon, I don't doubt your ability to handle pressure. But you've got a lot of people looking to you for guidance right now. They need to know you're in the game, mentally. SpaceX needs you." The words were blunt, but Gwyn wasn't wrong. In that moment, Elon realized how much of himself he had given to the company, to the mission. He had poured his heart and soul into SpaceX, but somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of his own emotional health. In the rush to push humanity toward Mars, he had forgotten to stop and take stock of where he was. "I'll be there soon," Elon said after a brief silence. "Let's talk in person. We can discuss everything." "All right," Gwyn said, sounding satisfied with the resolution. "But remember, Elon. This is bigger than any of us. And we need you at your best." After ending the call, Elon stared out the window for a few moments. The weight of responsibility he felt for SpaceX was immense. He had built this company from the ground up, defying the odds and challenging the status quo. It had never been about the money for him, no, it was about changing the future of humanity. But he had become so consumed with the mission that he had neglected the very thing that had been driving him, his own emotional resilience. He needed a moment. A moment to recalibrate. A moment to figure out how to balance the weight of his ambitions with the lessons he had learned from his father. A few days later, Elon found himself standing in front of the sleek SpaceX headquarters, the glass building reflecting the pale blue sky above. As he walked through the doors, the familiar hum of activity greeted him. Engineers working on prototypes, scientists discussing new breakthroughs, and the constant drone of innovation in the air. This was where his true purpose lived, where the ideas he had imagined years ago were becoming tangible realities. It was here that he felt alive, where his vision and his team's work intersected in ways that were nothing short of extraordinary. But even here, in the heart of his empire, he couldn't shake the feeling that something needed to change. As much as he loved his work, he had come to realize that his single-minded focus on the future had left him disconnected from the present. He headed straight for Gwyn's office, knowing she would be expecting him. Her office, much like everything else at SpaceX, was designed for function, not comfort, sleek and minimalistic, with no room for distractions. Gwyn sat behind her desk, looking as composed as ever, but there was a faint concern in her eyes that gave away her true feelings. "Elon," she said, standing up as he walked in. "Good to see you." "I'm here, as promised," Elon replied with a half-smile, taking a seat across from her. "I think we need to talk about something." Gwyn raised an eyebrow. "Something personal?" Elon nodded, feeling a flicker of vulnerability. "Yeah, I think I've been too focused on the mission. I've been so consumed with getting to Mars that I forgot to take care of myself along the way." Gwyn's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear you say that. We all know how much this means to you, Elon, but you're human. And sometimes, we need to slow down and check in with ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup." Elon thought about that for a moment. He had always prided himself on his ability to push forward, to work tirelessly for his dreams. But Gwyn was right. He couldn't ignore the emotional toll it had taken on him, and he couldn't continue at this pace without taking care of his mental and emotional well-being. "Thank you, Gwyn," Elon said, feeling the weight of his words. "I think I've been neglecting something important, something that's always been there, even when I didn't acknowledge it. I need to start taking better care of myself. And I need to reconnect with my roots." Gwyn nodded in understanding. "And we'll support you in that. But remember, you're not alone in this. You have a whole team here at SpaceX, and you have me, too." The conversation with Gwyn was the first of many steps Elon would take on his journey to find balance. It was a turning point, a realization that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders alone. He could lean on the people around him, his team, and even his family. As the day went on, Elon began to formulate a new plan, not just for SpaceX, but for himself. He knew that the path forward wasn't going to be easy. There would still be setbacks, still be challenges, and still be moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face them head-on. He was no longer just Elon Musk, the ambitious visionary. He was also a son, a man with a legacy to honor and a future to shape, not just for the world, but for himself. And as he sat back in his office, looking out at the vast expanse of the future he was building, he knew that the path forward was clearer than ever. It wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about making sure that, no matter how high he soared, he never lost sight of the ground beneath his feet. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Elon Musk's office, casting long, golden rays across the polished floors of the SpaceX headquarters. The world outside was buzzing with activity, as it always was, but inside this room, there was a stillness. For the first time in a long while, Elon wasn't rushing to the next meeting, the next press conference, or the next business deal. He had promised himself that this time, he would slow down and reevaluate the trajectory of not just his company but his life. It was a strange feeling, almost foreign. For so long, Elon had been consumed with the future, with progress, with the desire to leave a mark on history. But now, for the first time, he was facing the present. He was looking at the here and now, at the people who had always been by his side, and at the choices that had led him to this point. Gwyn Shotwell had been right. He had been neglecting himself. He had been so fixated on moving forward that he had failed to realize that the strength of any journey came from understanding where you were in the moment. And now, sitting in his office with a sense of clarity, he knew he needed to change, not just for the betterment of his work, but for his own well-being. Elon had always been driven, relentless in his pursuit of innovation. But today, his mind was shifting. Today, it wasn't just about Mars, electric cars, or space travel. Today was about the people who had gotten him here. And for the first time, he realized that the people who had believed in him, who had trusted in his vision, were just as important as the vision itself. A knock on the door broke his reverie. It was Gwyn, looking as composed as ever, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You're deep in thought, Elon," she said, stepping into the room with a folder in her hand. "Ready to discuss the latest updates?" Elon looked up at her, his mind still buzzing from the thoughts he'd been wrestling with. "Gwyn, I've been thinking. We've been working at a breakneck pace for years, pushing for innovation, for progress. But what about the people? What about the team?" She raised an eyebrow, sensing that something had shifted. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elon said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I've been so focused on the end goal, on the mission, that I haven't been paying enough attention to the people who are making it all happen. I think it's time for us to reassess our approach, not just as a company, but as a team. We need to make sure everyone is supported, mentally, emotionally, as well as professionally." Gwyn studied him for a moment before nodding. "I agree. We've been pushing hard, and sometimes it's easy to forget that innovation is a team effort. But I can see that you're going through something, Elon. You've been carrying a lot." Elon sighed, feeling the weight of his own admission. "I think it's time I take a step back and really focus on what's important. This isn't just about SpaceX or Tesla. It's about the people who are with me on this journey. It's about family, too." Gwyn sat down across from him, folding her hands in front of her. "And where does that leave you, Elon? Are you planning to step back from the company?" "No," Elon said quickly, shaking his head. "I'm not stepping back. But I think I need to find a better balance between my vision and the people around me. I need to spend more time with those who matter most. I need to make sure I'm not losing myself in the process. Gwyn nodded thoughtfully. I think that's a good idea. You've got a lot of people who look up to you, not just here, but around the world. They want to see that you're human, too. Elon smiled, a flicker of humor crossing his face. I suppose I've kept up that alien persona for long enough. They both chuckled, but the conversation turned serious again. Gwyn's eyes softened. You know, you're not alone in this. You've built an incredible team. And I think if you lead by example, if you show them that it's okay to take a step back and take care of ourselves, they'll follow. They look up to you for more than just your ideas. They admire your humanity. For a long moment, Elon didn't respond. He simply looked out the window, his thoughts swirling. He had always prided himself on being the one to push the limits, the one who would go farther and faster than anyone else. But now, he was beginning to see that true leadership wasn't just about vision or ambition. It was about connection. It was about understanding that the journey was just as important as the destination. I need to make a change, Elon said finally, his voice steady. A real change. Not just for SpaceX, but for me. For my family. I need to start living in the present, and I need to help others do the same. Gwyn leaned forward, her expression softening. That's a good start, Elon. But you'll have to be patient with yourself. It's a process. You can't change everything overnight. Elon nodded, taking in her words. I know. But I'm ready to try. The conversation lingered in the air as Gwyn handed him the folder, a practical reminder that while change was necessary, the work would always continue. Elon took the folder, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the future, about his family, about the lessons he had learned from his father, and about the way forward. It was a future that included more than just his professional life. It was a future that would balance his ambition with his need for connection. That afternoon, Elon took a few hours to reflect in private. He needed space, time to think about the path ahead, about how he would approach the world moving forward. He thought about the long-standing tension with his father, Errol. Perhaps now was the time to revisit their relationship, to see if it could evolve into something more than just silence. The idea felt daunting, but necessary. His father's quiet strength had been a pillar for Elon in many ways, but it had also been a source of isolation. Maybe it was time to change that too. As the sun began to set, Elon made a decision. He would take the next step, not just as a businessman, but as a son, as a father, and as a person. The work ahead of him was monumental, but for the first time, it felt like he was ready to face it with a new understanding of what truly mattered. The path forward was no longer just about reaching for the stars. It was about understanding the people who had helped him get there, and remembering to take care of himself along the way. And so, Elon Musk took his first steps toward a new kind of leadership, one that was grounded in humanity, in relationships, and in the quiet moments of self-reflection that had been missing from his life for so long. As the evening sky deepened into night, Elon knew that the future still beckoned, but it no longer felt like a race. It was a journey. A journey that, for the first time, he was ready to take one step at a time. The days after that pivotal conversation with Gwyn were filled with a sense of quiet determination. Elon had decided to take a different approach, not just to work, but to life itself. He wasn't going to rush through every moment anymore. For once, he allowed himself to breathe, to think, and most importantly, to reconnect with the people who mattered most. As he sat in his office that morning, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The world outside was as fast-paced and chaotic as always, but inside, in the comfort of his own space, he was making a conscious choice to slow down. He wasn't completely sure how it would unfold, but he knew that his next step was clear: it was time to reconnect with his father. Elon had always maintained a complicated relationship with his dad. Growing up in South Africa, his father, Elon Musk, had been a stern and distant figure. Errol was a successful engineer and entrepreneur, but the relationship between father and son had always been strained. Elon had never felt the emotional warmth or support that many children receive from their parents. In some ways, he had come to see his father more as a figure to be admired from a distance than as a close, personal connection. But that was before the trial, before the moment when Errol had stood up in the courtroom without a word and shifted Elon's world. Elon wasn't sure what had changed in his father during those few seconds, but he felt something inside himself shift as well. For the first time, he saw a side of Errol that wasn't about achievement or success. There was something deeper, something more human, that had been revealed in that moment. With a deep breath, Elon reached for his phone. He had avoided calling his father in the past, unsure of what to say. But now, with the newfound clarity he had gained, he felt ready. Ready to take that step toward reconciliation, toward healing the wounds that had been left unspoken for so long. The phone rang once, twice, then his father picked up. "Hello." Errol's voice was low and measured, as it always was. "Hi, Dad," Elon said, his voice soft but firm. "It's Elon." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elon could hear the subtle shift in his father's breathing, the way he hesitated before responding. "Elon," Errol finally said, his tone betraying no emotion. "What is it?" "I've been thinking," Elon began, carefully choosing his words. "About us. About everything. I think we need to talk." Another long pause. Elon could feel the distance in his father's silence, the years of unresolved tension hanging in the air. "I'm not sure what there is to talk about," Errol replied, his voice steady but distant. "You're a grown man now. You've built your empire. What do you need from me?" Elon felt a pang of frustration. He had expected this. His father wasn't one for emotional exchanges, especially after all these years of estrangement. But Elon was determined. He knew that this conversation, no matter how difficult, was necessary for his own growth, and for the possibility of moving forward. "I need to understand you, Dad," Elon said, his voice quieter now. "I need to understand why things turned out the way they did between us. And I need you to understand where I'm coming from now." There was a long silence on the other end. Elon waited, unsure of what would come next. "I don't know if there's much to understand," Errol finally said. "I did what I had to do. I provided for you, gave you an education, made sure you had the opportunities. Isn't that enough?" Elon clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to argue. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. But he also knew that it was a conversation they had to have, one that would either open the door to healing or close it permanently. "No, it's not enough, Dad," Elon said, his voice steady now. "I know you provided for me in the ways that you thought were important. But I needed something more. I needed you to be there, not just as a provider, but as a father. I needed your support. I needed your encouragement." Errol's voice softened slightly, though his tone still carried the weight of years of distance. "You think I didn't want to be there for you?" "I don't know, Dad," Elon admitted. "I don't know what you wanted, or what you were capable of giving. But I do know that I spent years chasing your approval. And maybe that's something I have to let go of. But I can't do that until we talk." There was another long pause before Errol finally spoke. "You've always been driven, Elon," he said quietly. "Maybe I didn't know how to show you love in the way you needed. I don't know if that's something I can fix." Elon felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't the apology he had hoped for, but it was something real. Something that acknowledged the distance between them, the emotional gap that had existed for so long. "Maybe it's not about fixing it," Elon said, his voice softer now. "Maybe it's about understanding. I've spent a long time resenting you for things I didn't understand. But I think I'm ready to move past that. I want to understand you, Dad. I want us to move forward, if we can." There was a long, heavy silence. For a moment, Elon thought the conversation was over. But then, Errol spoke again, his voice quieter, almost vulnerable. I don't know if I'm capable of being the father you want, Elon, he said, his words slow and measured. But maybe I can try. Elon felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of something different, something better, between him and his father. I think trying is enough, Dad, Elon said, his voice thick with emotion. That's all I've ever wanted. Just a chance. They both fell silent, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. But for the first time, it wasn't an unbearable silence. It was the kind of silence that came with the understanding that something had changed, something had shifted, just slightly, but enough to make a difference. I'll be in touch soon, Elon added. We can figure this out, one step at a time. And with that, the conversation ended. Elon sat back in his chair, staring out at the city below. He knew that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time, it felt like it was worth traveling. Elon's mind wandered to the people who had shaped him over the years, Gwyn, the team at SpaceX, his children, and now, his father. Each of them had played a role in his journey, and each of them had helped him reach this point. But the most important realization of all was this: the journey wasn't just about the destination. It was about the people who walked it with him. As the days went by, Elon continued to work, but with a new sense of purpose. The future of SpaceX, Tesla, and even the colonization of Mars were all still within reach. But he now understood that the real success would come not from the outer worlds he was exploring, but from the relationships he nurtured on Earth. The phone call with his father had been a turning point for Elon. A brief, raw conversation that had uncovered more emotions than he had expected. Despite the weight of that moment, he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to unpack between him and Errol. The walls that had been built between them over the years couldn't be torn down in a single conversation, but it was a start, a fragile one, but a start nonetheless. Over the following weeks, Elon found himself reflecting more on his past, his family, and the choices he had made that had led him here. The demands of his companies had not slowed, but he found himself more focused, more grounded. He took time for himself, his family, and his relationships in a way he hadn't done in years. The realization that he could lead a balanced life, one that included meaningful connections and not just technological triumphs, was a powerful shift. But despite his attempts at balancing work with personal reflection, the undercurrent of tension between him and his father remained. Elon knew that a casual phone call wouldn't resolve the years of bitterness and emotional neglect. It needed to be face-to-face. That was how real change happened. He needed to look his father in the eyes, hear his voice without the filter of a phone line, and find out if there was more beneath the surface. It didn't take long for Elon to make up his mind. The next step was clear. He picked up the phone once again, dialed his father's number, and waited for the familiar, almost indifferent voice to answer. "Hello. Dad," Elon began, his tone calm but with a new sense of purpose. "I was thinking it might be time we meet. In person. I think there's a lot more we need to talk about." Errol was quiet for a moment, and Elon could almost feel the skepticism on the other end of the line. But to his surprise, Errol didn't dismiss the idea outright. "Where do you want to meet?" Errol finally asked, his voice low and careful. "I was thinking maybe we could meet at the cabin. The one outside Johannesburg. We can talk, just the two of us," Elon suggested, his eyes wandering to the view outside his office window. "No distractions, just us." There was another pause, and Elon waited for a response. He could sense his father's hesitation, but he also understood that this would be uncomfortable for both of them. Errol was not the type of man to easily express vulnerability, and yet, something in Elon's voice seemed to cut through the years of silence. "All right," Errol finally agreed, the single word carrying more weight than it seemed. "I'll meet you there." A week later, Elon found himself on a private jet heading toward South Africa. His mind was racing with all the possible outcomes of this meeting. Part of him feared that it would be another cold, unproductive conversation that would leave him more frustrated than before. But there was also a quiet hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the moment that began to heal the rift between them. When Elon arrived at the cabin, the familiar landscape of the South African countryside stretched out before him, vast and open. The place had always felt like a retreat for him, somewhere he could go to escape the pressure of the world and reconnect with his roots. It was strange, though, to be here for a reason other than work. He wasn't here to strategize or plan the next big project. This time, he was here for something much more personal. As he stepped out of the car, he saw his father standing near the entrance of the cabin. Errol was older now, his hair graying at the temples, his posture still as straight and imposing as ever. But there was something different about him today. His expression wasn't as hard as it usually was. It was almost uncertain. Elon couldn't remember the last time he had seen his father this way, and it made him uneasy. "Dad," Elon said as he approached, extending his hand. Errol looked at his son, then shook his hand with a firm grip. "Elon," he replied, his voice low, but there was a hint of warmth there, something that wasn't usually present. The two men stood in awkward silence for a few moments, neither knowing quite how to start. Elon was about to say something when Errol spoke first. "So, this is your big idea?" Errol asked, a hint of dry humor in his voice. "Us, talking? After all these years?" Elon couldn't help but let out a small, nervous laugh. "I guess so. I think it's long overdue." Errol didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned and walked inside the cabin, motioning for Elon to follow. The cabin was modest but cozy, with a crackling fire in the hearth and wooden beams that gave it a warm, rustic feel. It was a place that had always been a sanctuary for Elon, a place where he could escape the constant demands of his high-profile life. But today, it was a place where he hoped to confront the emotional distance that had haunted his relationship with his father for so long. They sat down in front of the fire, the silence between them hanging heavily in the air. Elon looked over at his father, his heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment when everything could change. Or it could all fall apart. "You know," Errol began, his voice quieter now, "I always thought you'd come back here when you were older. I thought that maybe, just maybe, we'd be able to talk about things." His eyes met Elon's, but there was something vulnerable in his gaze that Elon hadn't seen before. "But I never expected it to be like this. You've become someone I don't always recognize." Elon swallowed hard, his emotions stirring. "I know. I've been distant. Not just from you, but from everyone. I've been so focused on the future, on everything I wanted to achieve, that I forgot about the people who matter most." Errol's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, Elon saw his father as something more than a distant, cold figure. He saw him as a man, someone who had his own regrets, his own fears, and his own struggles. And in that moment, Elon realized just how much they had in common, despite everything that had driven them apart. "You've always had a vision, Elon," Errol said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I've always respected that. But I think, deep down, I've been afraid. Afraid that you would leave me behind. Afraid that I would lose you, just like I lost everything else in my life." Elon felt a knot form in his throat. He had never heard his father speak like this, open, raw, and vulnerable. For years, he had carried the weight of his father's expectations, but now he realized that his father had carried a weight of his own, the fear of losing the son he never fully knew how to connect with. "I'm sorry, Dad," Elon said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I'd shut you out." Errol let out a long breath, as if the years of silence were finally being exhaled. "It's not too late, Elon. We can still find a way to make things right." For the first time in his life, Elon felt a sense of peace settle within him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew that this conversation, this moment of vulnerability, had opened a door. They could never erase the years of distance, but they could start to rebuild. And that, he realized, was all that truly mattered. As they sat by the fire, the weight of the past beginning to lift, Elon knew that the journey ahead was one that would require patience, understanding, and time. But he also knew that with this new beginning, they had a chance, however small, to heal the wounds that had separated them for so long. For the first time, the future didn't seem so distant. It seemed possible. As the fire crackled, Elon and Errol sat in silence, not needing to say anything more. The simple act of being together, of facing the past and acknowledging their shared humanity, was enough. It was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. The days following Elon's conversation with his father were nothing short of transformative. In the quiet calm of the South African cabin, surrounded by the vast wilderness, Elon had taken the first steps toward repairing a relationship that had been fractured for so many years. The conversations between him and Errol remained sparse, but each one seemed to carry more weight than the last. They were no longer two strangers forced into uncomfortable proximity. They were father and son, slowly rediscovering the pieces of each other they had long since buried. For Elon, the process was liberating in a way he hadn't expected. Despite the hectic pace of his work, he found himself prioritizing moments of connection, whether it was with his family, his team, or now, his father. For the first time, he realized that success wasn't solely defined by the number of rockets launched into space or the billions in his company's valuation. Success, in its truest form, was also about those moments of human connection. It was about building bridges rather than just conquering the stars. But even as he began to heal the relationship with his father, the world around him remained in turmoil. The pressure of leading SpaceX and Tesla, the constant scrutiny from the media, the endless challenges of advancing technology and changing industries, all of these were realities that never ceased. And while Elon had embraced the idea of emotional healing, he knew that he could not escape the weight of his responsibilities. On a rainy afternoon, Elon sat in his office at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. He had just finished a series of meetings about the upcoming Mars mission, an initiative that seemed more real with each passing day. But as much as he had always been obsessed with space, there was something deeper gnawing at him now. It was the quiet tug of unresolved feelings, about his family, about his future, and about the relationships that had shaped who he was. His phone buzzed on the desk in front of him. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell, his longtime business partner and president of SpaceX. Gwynne was one of the few people in Elon's life who had remained a constant, a steady presence who had always challenged him, supported him, and at times, questioned him when necessary. "Elon, need to talk. We have a situation," the text read. Elon's heart sank. It wasn't like Gwynne to send a message like that unless something serious was brewing. He quickly dialed her number, and after a few rings, she answered. "Hey, Gwynne," Elon said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Elon, it's not good," she replied, her tone unusually tight. "We've been getting pressure from the government. They want a faster timeline for the Mars mission, and they're questioning whether we're truly capable of delivering. There's talk of pulling funding if we don't deliver something significant in the next year." Elon's mind raced. SpaceX had made remarkable progress, but the pace of progress was never fast enough for those who expected instant results. He had always known that the pressure would mount as they neared the goal, but he didn't expect the government to turn up the heat so quickly. "I'll handle it," Elon said, his voice now firm, masking any trace of concern. "Get the team together. We need to put together a plan for them, something they can't ignore." "Are you sure?" Gwynne asked, sensing the weight of the moment. "This is big. It's not just about the mission anymore. They're questioning everything we're doing. The future of SpaceX could be at risk." Elon paused, staring out the window. He had spent his entire career pushing boundaries, building a company from the ground up, and challenging the world's perception of what was possible. The thought that SpaceX, his life's work, could be dismantled or abandoned was unthinkable. "I said I'll handle it," Elon repeated. "Let's make this happen. We're not backing down." In the days that followed, Elon threw himself into the mission with even more intensity. He met with his engineering teams late into the night, reviewing data, refining designs, and pushing every boundary he could think of. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as he worked tirelessly to come up with a plan that would blow the government's doubts out of the water. But despite his relentless drive, he couldn't shake the underlying unease. The pressure was unlike anything he had ever experienced. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his personal life pressing in on him as well. At home, his relationship with Grimes had also become strained. While they had always been private about their relationship, the stress of their respective careers, compounded by Elon's emotional reconnection with his father, had created a rift between them. There were moments of silence when they sat in the same room, a quiet that spoke volumes about the growing distance between them. In the midst of all this, Elon found himself at a crossroads. The intense focus on his career, while fulfilling in many ways, had taken a toll on his personal relationships. It wasn't just the situation with Grimes or his father. It was the constant struggle to balance the demands of work with the need for human connection. It was the realization that no matter how successful he became, he couldn't ignore the importance of the people who truly mattered. As the days wore on, Elon found himself growing more and more reflective. During one particularly grueling late-night meeting, as he reviewed plans for the next Mars launch, he paused. He needed a break. His mind was racing, and he could feel the exhaustion settling deep within him. The constant pushing, the relentless drive, it was beginning to take a toll on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He made an unexpected decision. He shut down his computer, stood up from his desk, and walked out of the office. He didn't know where he was going, but he needed to get out. He needed to clear his head. The familiar hum of SpaceX headquarters faded into the background as he walked outside into the crisp night air, the stars above him reminding him of his bigger vision, the one that had always pushed him forward. For the first time in a long while, Elon let his mind wander. He thought about his father, about the progress they had made in their relationship. He thought about his children, about the kind of father he wanted to be. He thought about the people who had stood by him through thick and thin, the ones who had believed in him when even he had doubts. And then, for a brief moment, he thought about himself. He thought about the person he had become, the relentless innovator, the driven entrepreneur, the man who had often sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of progress. He thought about whether it was all worth it. The answer, as it always had been, was complicated. Elon stood there for a long time, looking up at the stars, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. But in that moment, he also felt a sense of clarity. The challenges he faced weren't just external, they were internal as well. He had always been a man of vision, a man driven by ambition. But he also needed to be a man of balance. He needed to reconnect with the people who mattered most and take a step back from the things that had consumed him for so long. He didn't have all the answers. But for the first time, he understood that it wasn't about solving everything at once. It was about taking one step at a time, toward his family, toward his work, and most importantly, toward himself. As he turned to head back into the building, he felt a strange sense of peace. The road ahead would still be tough, and the obstacles would continue to come, but he was ready to face them, one day at a time. And as he walked back to his office, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe it was the start of a new chapter, one where success wasn't defined by his work alone, but by his ability to live a life that was balanced, meaningful, and filled with the relationships that mattered most. The turning point had come. And for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk felt ready to face the future. The weeks after Elon's revelation were a mix of progress and struggle. On the one hand, the work at SpaceX and Tesla was moving forward at an impressive pace. New rockets were in development, and Mars missions continued to inch closer to reality. But on the other hand, Elon found himself constantly battling a growing sense of internal conflict. The more he worked, the more he realized just how much he had neglected his own well-being and his relationships in the process. The phone calls with his father continued, but the emotional distance still lingered between them. Every time they spoke, Elon felt that something was missing. The connection that had once been there, albeit fractured, hadn't yet fully healed. It was as though they were both walking on eggshells, trying to navigate a relationship that was so fundamentally broken. Even his relationship with Grimes had hit a rough patch. The strain of balancing their own careers, their family, and the pressures of Elon's work had caused more distance between them than he was willing to admit. Despite their attempts to communicate, the gap seemed to grow wider. In the midst of all this, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was building up, something he wasn't prepared to face. The relentless pace of work and life was catching up with him, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was losing control. He had always been the one to push through adversity, to outwork the competition, to sacrifice everything for the sake of his vision. But now, he was realizing that this mindset was taking a toll in ways he hadn't foreseen. It all came to a head one evening. Elon had been working late, as usual, reviewing the latest projections for Tesla's new electric vehicle line. It was a huge project, one that had the potential to solidify Tesla's dominance in the electric vehicle market. But as he looked over the figures and projections, he felt a growing sense of unease. The numbers weren't adding up as he had hoped. The margin for error was smaller than he had anticipated, and there were concerns within the team about meeting the aggressive timeline. Elon's mind was racing, spinning through the possibilities, when the phone rang. It was Gwynne Shotwell again. "Elon, we need to talk," she said immediately. "We've got a situation." Elon stood up and walked toward the window of his office, staring out at the skyline of Los Angeles. He didn't have to ask what the situation was. He already knew. The pressure was mounting from all sides, and his vision for the future seemed to be under constant threat. "Is this about the Mars mission again?" Elon asked, his voice tight. "No," Gwynne replied. "It's about Tesla. There's been an issue with the suppliers. We're facing some major delays in production, and if we don't get this fixed, we could lose our competitive edge." Elon's stomach sank. He had known that the road to mass adoption of electric vehicles would be difficult, but this was a game changer. The delays in production could push back Tesla's timeline by months, maybe even years. That was the kind of setback that could set the company back by decades in an industry that was evolving so rapidly. "I'll deal with it," Elon said, his voice calm but betraying the tension he was feeling. "Get the team together. I want a full report by tomorrow morning." As he hung up the phone, Elon sank back into his chair. His mind was racing. He had built everything on the idea that Tesla and SpaceX would lead the world into a new era, but now it seemed like everything was on the verge of collapsing. The pressure to deliver on those promises was suffocating. It wasn't just about the companies anymore. It was about his entire legacy, the impact he would leave on the world. He rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the weight of it all. The expectations, the constant demands, the need to be perfect, it was all too much. And yet, he couldn't stop. He couldn't back down. He had pushed himself to the limit for years, and now, he didn't know how to stop. The next morning, Elon arrived at Tesla's headquarters in Palo Alto early, already deep in thought about how to address the production delays. He met with the team in the conference room, a small group of engineers, production leads, and suppliers. As they presented their findings and solutions, Elon felt himself becoming more and more detached. He was hearing the words, but they didn't feel real. There was a part of him that was already thinking about the next crisis, the next problem to solve. The cycle was never ending. Gwynne caught his eye across the table, her brow furrowed. She could see the exhaustion on his face, the weariness that was beginning to seep into his every move. She knew him too well. She could tell that something was wrong, but she also knew that Elon wouldn't admit it, not until it was too late. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly as the meeting broke up. Elon paused, looking down at his hands. For a moment, he considered telling her the truth, that he was on the brink, that the constant pressure was eating away at him, that he didn't know how much longer he could keep up the charade. But instead, he just nodded. "I'm fine," he said, his voice betraying the lie. Gwyn didn't press him. She had seen this behavior too many times before, Elon pushing himself beyond the limit, convincing himself that he could handle it all. But she also knew that the cracks were beginning to show. As Elon walked out of the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was teetering on the edge of something. Something had to give. His work, his relationships, his health, he couldn't keep up the pace much longer. But in the back of his mind, a more unsettling thought lingered. What if this was who he was meant to be? What if this relentless drive, this obsessive focus, was his true calling? What if he couldn't afford to stop? That night, Elon couldn't sleep. His mind raced through the endless list of tasks he had to complete, the people he had to meet, the goals he had to achieve. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet the storm inside his head. He thought back to the conversation with his father at the cabin, the unexpected vulnerability they had shared. It had been a breakthrough, but it hadn't been enough. There was still so much left unsaid. The pressure to be perfect, to always push forward, had come from more than just his companies. It had come from his past, from the unresolved emotions that still lingered between him and his family. He had always believed that if he could just achieve more, do more, be more, then everything would fall into place. But now, it was clear that the pieces didn't fit. At that moment, Elon realized something that would change everything: he couldn't keep running from the past. He couldn't keep burying his emotions in his work. If he was going to move forward, truly move forward, he would need to face the things he had avoided for so long. The breaking point had come. As Elon sat up in bed, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and clarity, he knew what he had to do. The next step was no longer about building rockets or electric cars. It was about confronting the hardest challenge he had ever faced, himself. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it head-on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The morning after his restless night, Elon awoke with a strange sense of clarity. For once, he felt a different kind of urgency. One that wasn't driven by deadlines or looming crises, but by an internal need for resolution. The world around him was still moving at its usual breakneck pace, but for the first time in a long while, Elon recognized that the most important thing for him wasn't solving the next great challenge in space or technology, it was confronting the personal demons he had been running from for years. The decision had come slowly, but now, standing in the soft morning light of his penthouse in Los Angeles, he knew it was time to face the things he had avoided. He had to confront the past, the fractured relationship with his father, the deep-rooted fears about his own worth, and the growing distance in his relationship with Grimes. All of it had been building for years, like pressure in a dam. If he didn't confront it soon, the whole structure would collapse. As he sat down for breakfast alone, Elon's mind was already working through the logistics. He had a full day of meetings ahead, but he knew that he couldn't just push these thoughts aside. He needed to take action. The first thing he did that morning was reach out to his father. The call had been difficult to initiate, but it was necessary. "Errol," Elon began, his voice strained but determined. "We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "About what?" Errol's voice was cautious, but not unfriendly. "I think it's time we faced everything that's been left unsaid," Elon continued, his words slow but resolute. "The past, the way we've always interacted, it's time to make sense of it." There was another long pause before Errol spoke again. "You're right. It's time. I'll come to you." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected his father to be so agreeable, so ready to engage. But something about the tone of his voice told him that Errol, too, knew this moment was long overdue. "We'll talk in person," Elon said, his voice softer now. "It's long overdue." The drive to the cabin was a blur. Elon's mind raced with what he wanted to say, how he wanted to finally bridge the gap between them. The relationship with his father had always been strained, like two parallel lines that never quite met. There had been the expectation of greatness placed on him since childhood, but no real guidance or support. And in turn, Elon had created his own expectations. Expectations that only seemed to grow more unrealistic as the years went by. He had pushed himself, and in doing so, pushed everyone around him away. Now, standing at the threshold of something unknown, Elon was beginning to understand that real success wasn't about how many ventures he could conquer. It was about healing the wounds within himself. When he arrived at the cabin, his father was already there, waiting for him. Errol was a man of few words, but his presence was commanding, somehow both distant and demanding. Elon could see the lines of age on his father's face, the way his eyes had dulled slightly with time. Without a word, they sat across from each other, the tension palpable in the air. It had always been like this between them, quiet, heavy with unspoken expectations. But this time, there was a shift. There was a recognition that the walls they had built over the years couldn't stand any longer. "Elon," Errol finally spoke, his voice low and rough, "I know I've made mistakes. I've been harsh. I've pushed you in ways I shouldn't have. But that doesn't mean I don't care. It just means I didn't know how to show it." Elon took a deep breath, feeling a surge of emotion. "I've spent so many years thinking I had to prove something. To you. To the world. I didn't stop to think that I might be running away from what really matters. From you." There it was. The truth that had been buried for so long. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for the things I've done," Elon continued. "But I want to try. I want to move forward, not just with my work, but with you. With my family." Errol's eyes softened, a faint glimmer of something resembling regret in them. "I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, son. But I'm willing to try, too." The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were long pauses, moments of silence where neither knew what to say. But slowly, piece by piece, the walls came down. They talked about the past, about the mistakes, the things they had done to each other. They spoke about their fears, their vulnerabilities, and for the first time in years, Elon felt like he was being seen not as the billionaire entrepreneur, but as a son, someone who needed his father's approval and love just as much as anyone else. When the conversation ended, it wasn't with a neat resolution. It wasn't the kind of breakthrough that you see in movies, where everything is magically fixed. But it was enough. Enough to begin healing, enough to start moving forward in a new way. "I think we're just getting started," Elon said as they stood up to leave. "But for the first time, I don't feel like we're stuck." "I think you're right," Errol said with a small, thoughtful nod. As Elon left the cabin, the weight of years of unresolved emotion seemed a little lighter. The journey was far from over, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all you need, to take the first step. When Elon returned to his office later that day, he found himself feeling a rare sense of calm. The urgency he had always felt was still there, but it was tempered by a deeper understanding. He could still chase his goals, still push the boundaries of what was possible. But now, he understood that success wasn't just about achieving more. It was about being whole, about reconnecting with the parts of himself he had neglected for so long. As he sat at his desk, looking over the latest designs for the Mars mission, a thought crossed his mind. Perhaps this was the next frontier, not space, but the space within. The place where his greatest challenge would be to reconcile the ambitious, relentless innovator with the man who needed to heal, to be human. It wasn't going to be easy. But it was necessary. Later that evening, Elon called Grimes. Their relationship, too, had been suffering under the strain of his single-minded pursuit of success. It was time to face that, too. As he dialed her number, he felt a nervous tightness in his chest. The conversation would be difficult, but it had to happen. "Hey," he said softly when she picked up. "I think we need to talk." The reckoning had begun. The next few days were a blur of meetings, calls, and emails, but the weight that had once consumed Elon now seemed lighter. The conversations with his father had set something in motion inside him, a shift that he didn't entirely understand, but it was a shift nonetheless. There was a new sense of balance, a new awareness of how deeply personal relationships, his family, his love life, his friendships, had been neglected. For the first time in a long time, he realized that no matter how great the technological breakthroughs he led, it wouldn't matter if the foundation of his personal life crumbled. As he sat at his desk later that week, reviewing the latest updates on SpaceX and Tesla, his mind often wandered back to the call he had made to Grimes. It had been a difficult conversation, one that left both of them raw. She had listened, her voice steady but tinged with sadness, and after a long pause, she had agreed to meet him in person. When Elon arrived at the park where they had decided to meet, the air was crisp, and the trees rustled gently in the late afternoon breeze. He spotted Grimes before she saw him, standing by a fountain, her back to him. She had always been a figure of both mystery and warmth in his life, someone who understood the intricacies of his mind and yet remained outside of the pressure cooker of his world. But even with that understanding, the distance between them had grown. As he walked up to her, his heart raced. He knew that this wasn't just another conversation. It was a turning point, one where both of them would either break apart or find a way to rebuild. "Hey," he said softly, his voice unsure as he reached her side. She turned to face him, and for a moment, they just stood there, both of them searching for the right words. Her eyes, always so expressive, flicked over him, as if seeing him for the first time in a long while. "Hey," she replied, her voice gentle but distant. They both sat down on the nearby bench, the silence between them hanging heavy in the air. Elon's hands fidgeted in his lap, a sign of the uncertainty he had been feeling for months. He couldn't deny it anymore, he had been too focused on everything else, and in doing so, he had let the most important parts of his life slip through his fingers. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Elon began, his voice low. "About everything. About us. About the way I've been living, and how much I've pushed myself, and you, away." Grimes nodded, her expression unreadable. "I know, Elon. I know. You've been absent, even when you're here. You've been so focused on the next thing, the next step, that it feels like nothing else matters." Her words stung, but they were true. He had been absent, even when physically present. The relentless drive for perfection, for innovation, had clouded his ability to show up for her, to be present in the moments that mattered. He had prioritized the future so much that he had forgotten how to nurture the relationships in the here and now. "I don't know how to make up for that," Elon said, his voice tight. "I don't know how to fix what I've broken, but I'm willing to try. I want to try." Grimes studied him for a long moment, her gaze intense but not unkind. "You're right, Elon. It's not just about trying. It's about showing up. Being here. Being real. You've always been able to move mountains in the world of technology, but you can't fix everything with just your intellect and ambition. Sometimes, you need to show your heart." Elon nodded, the truth of her words settling deep within him. It wasn't just about apologizing or offering solutions. It was about being vulnerable, showing the parts of himself that he had kept hidden for so long. "I've always thought that if I could just achieve enough, then everything would fall into place. That if I could conquer the next frontier, whether in space or technology, then I'd be enough. But I'm starting to realize that it doesn't work like that. And I don't want to keep going this way, pushing people away in the process." Grimes' eyes softened. "I know. I know you're trying, but sometimes, your drive becomes a wall between us. And it's hard, Elon. It's really hard. But I've always believed in you. I think you can be more than what you're running from." Elon felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a guarantee that they could fix everything, but the possibility was there. They could rebuild, if both of them were willing to make the effort. "I've been running from so much, Grimes," he confessed. "I've been running from what's really important. And I don't want to do that anymore. I can't. The air between them seemed to shift, the weight of their words hanging in the space around them. It wasn't an instant fix, but it was a beginning. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be work to do, patience to be found, and healing to undertake. But in this moment, there was a sense that they were on the path to something better. Do you think we can do it? Elon asked, his voice almost a whisper. Grimes didn't hesitate. I think we can. But it's going to take time. And we have to be patient with each other. For the first time in what felt like ages, Elon felt like he wasn't carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. There was still so much to do, so many challenges ahead, but in this small moment, he could breathe. He wasn't alone. The days that followed were filled with new conversations, new promises, and a willingness to be vulnerable with each other. Elon took steps to slow down, to spend more time with Grimes and their family. He made an effort to not only show up physically but to be emotionally present as well. At work, he made changes too. He realized that his personal life and his work were intertwined more than he had ever understood before. The constant drive for success at the expense of everything else wasn't sustainable, and it certainly wasn't making him happy. He began delegating more, trusting his teams at SpaceX and Tesla to carry the weight of the projects he had once tried to shoulder alone. For the first time, he allowed himself to focus on being a father, a partner, and a person, rather than just a businessman. One evening, as he and Grimes sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset together, Elon reflected on the journey that had brought them here. You know, he said, I think this is the hardest thing I've ever done. Grimes smiled softly. What's that? Learning to slow down. Learning to be present. But I think I'm finally starting to get it. Good, she said, resting her head on his shoulder. I think you're finally on the right track. And for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk allowed himself to feel like he was exactly where he needed to be. The weeks that followed brought a sense of relative calm to Elon's life, but as with most moments of peace, it was fleeting. While he had made significant strides in rebuilding his relationship with Grimes and understanding the importance of his family, the nature of his work was always lurking in the background. SpaceX and Tesla were at critical points in their development, ambitious projects requiring both the push of innovation and the weight of responsibility. Elon had always been the kind of person to thrive under pressure, but recently, the stress had become more pronounced, his mind perpetually caught between his personal evolution and his professional obligations. It was as if the momentum of his life, built over decades of tireless effort, was pulling him forward, regardless of whether or not he was ready for the next step. One late evening, as he sat alone in his office at Tesla's headquarters, going through quarterly reports, the door to his office creaked open, drawing his attention. It was Gwynne Shotwell, his trusted colleague and the president and COO of SpaceX. You've been holed up in here for hours, Gwynne remarked with a half-smile, leaning against the doorframe. Care to take a break? Elon, distracted but grateful for her company, looked up and offered a tired grin. I don't know if I can. It feels like everything's in motion at once, like if I take my foot off the gas, everything might fall apart. Gwynne's expression softened as she entered, sitting across from him. I get it. But you know, even the most driven people need a moment to breathe. You've been pushing yourself, and everyone around you, non-stop for years. Maybe it's time to step back and let others handle the weight. You've built a hell of a team. Elon stared at the reports in front of him, the numbers and figures blurring into the background. He had always prided himself on being the driving force behind SpaceX and Tesla. His vision, his ambitions, they had all led the companies to where they were now. But Gwynne's words stung, because deep down, Elon knew they were true. He couldn't carry the weight alone forever, even if he had been conditioned to do so. You're right, Elon admitted. But every time I think about delegating more, I feel like I'm losing control. Like if I'm not in the trenches, things will slip away from me. Gwynne let out a soft laugh, the kind that was both knowing and reassuring. Elon, you've never been one to shy away from the trenches, but there's wisdom in trusting others to take the reins. You've already made history with what you've built. Let them take the baton, and you can still steer the ship without needing to be in every single meeting. Elon sighed and leaned back in his chair, the weight of the world still hanging over him. He'd come so far, but in many ways, the journey felt like it was just beginning. And yet, in the quiet moments like this, he couldn't help but question whether it was all worth it, the stress, the sacrifice, the relentless pursuit of greatness. "I'm not sure how to let go," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You don't have to let go completely," Gwyn replied, her voice gentle yet firm. "You've built something incredible, Elon. You don't have to carry it all on your shoulders. You can be both a visionary and a leader without burning yourself out. You just need to let the people who share your vision help you carry the load." Elon looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. I guess I'll have to learn how to trust. Trust them. Trust myself." Gwyn smiled, her expression one of quiet understanding. "That's the first step. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. You've already changed the world. Now it's time to make sure the world can keep changing without you burning out." The following days saw Elon taking more concrete steps to balance his responsibilities. He began delegating more of the day-to-day tasks at SpaceX and Tesla to Gwyn and the other executives he had put in place. The shift wasn't immediate, and there were moments of discomfort, of watching decisions being made without his direct input, but gradually, the teams he had carefully assembled began to thrive under the freedom to act without his constant oversight. It was in these moments that Elon realized the full magnitude of what Gwyn had said. Letting go didn't mean abandoning control, it meant giving others the opportunity to grow and innovate in ways he hadn't been able to while buried in the minutiae of everyday operations. Despite the internal resistance he sometimes felt, Elon was starting to see the potential in taking a step back. It was a new form of leadership for him, a form he hadn't fully understood until now. In his personal life, too, things were shifting. After the difficult but necessary conversation with Grimes, they had spent more time together, slowly rebuilding the bond that had once felt unbreakable. Though there were still moments of tension, they both knew they were moving in the right direction. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, Grimes took a deep breath before speaking. "Do you ever feel like you're too focused on building things outside of yourself?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the candlelight between them. Elon looked at her, his fork halfway to his mouth. It was a question that had been lingering in his mind for weeks, perhaps even longer. "I used to think that if I just built the right things, everything would fall into place. That if I reached the stars, I would have everything I needed here. But I've realized that no matter how far I push, it's not the same as being present. Not for you. Not for me. Not for anyone." Grimes' expression softened. "I'm glad to hear you say that. I've been so focused on creating a legacy," Elon continued, his voice thoughtful, "that I've lost sight of the importance of the people who are with me along the way. My family. You." Grimes reached out and took his hand, her touch grounding him in the moment. "We're here, Elon. But you have to show up for us too. You can't build something that lasts without building something real with the people you love." Elon nodded slowly, her words resonating deeper than anything he had heard in a long time. He could build rockets, he could change the world, but none of it would matter if the relationships he cherished fell apart. "You're right," he said softly. "I have to show up, too. I will." That night, as Elon lay in bed, the realization that had been forming over the past few months settled deep within him. The journey wasn't about endless expansion or never-ending pursuit. It was about understanding balance, learning when to push and when to pull back, when to build and when to nurture. He had come a long way from the man who had been consumed by ambition. And while the road ahead would still have its challenges, Elon Musk was beginning to understand that his greatest achievements wouldn't be in the stars, they would be in the people he loved, the relationships he mended, and the life he built outside of the boardroom and beyond the headlines. As he closed his eyes, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that the next frontier wasn't just out there in space, it was within himself. And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk was content to let the world turn without him constantly racing ahead. Elon's journey to understanding balance wasn't easy. The demands of his company still beckoned, and the constant hum of progress was never far from his mind. But for the first time in a long while, he understood the value of slowing down, of being fully present in both his personal and professional life. This realization didn't mean he had everything figured out, but it did mark a shift in how he viewed his role, not just as a visionary but as a father, a partner, and a leader. As weeks passed, he felt himself adjusting to this new rhythm, though the challenge of stepping back from the day-to-day operations of Tesla and SpaceX remained. His teams were excelling, and Gwyn had proven more than capable of managing the projects that had once demanded his every moment. Still, there were moments when the old Elon, the one who thrived on control and high-stakes decision-making, would resurface. One such moment occurred during a meeting at SpaceX's headquarters. Elon had joined the team for a discussion about an upcoming Mars mission, and despite the fact that Gwyn was leading the conversation, Elon couldn't help himself. "I think we're missing something," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "The current trajectory isn't ambitious enough. We need to aim higher, think beyond the schedule, beyond the budget constraints. What if we could push this mission to be the most ambitious, the most groundbreaking yet?" There was a pause in the room, and Gwyn's gaze shifted to Elon. She had been anticipating this. His drive for perfection was part of what had made him so successful, but it also meant that he struggled with letting go. "Ambition is good," Gwyn replied carefully, "but we also need to be realistic. We're already pushing the limits of what's possible. It's important to remember that this mission will take a huge toll on resources and time. Let's ensure we're prioritizing safety and feasibility." Elon frowned, his mind racing with possibilities. It wasn't that he disagreed with Gwyn, she was, after all, one of the best minds in the industry, but the desire to push the boundaries was ingrained in him. Every part of his being screamed for more, for the impossible, for the unreachable. After the meeting, as the room cleared out, Elon stayed behind, staring out the window at the sprawling campus of SpaceX. His mind was still in overdrive, contemplating what had just transpired. "Gwyn's right," he muttered to himself. "But why does it feel like I'm holding myself back?" It was a question he didn't have the answer to. Was he losing his edge by trying to slow down, or was he becoming a better leader by letting others step into the forefront? The internal battle raged on. Later that evening, after a long day of meetings and reflections, Elon met with Grimes at their favorite quiet spot in the city, a small cafe tucked away from the usual crowds. She was sitting at their table by the window when he arrived, a soft smile lighting up her face as he sat down. "How was the meeting?" she asked, her voice casual but filled with genuine curiosity. "It went well," Elon replied, though his words felt hollow. "But I'm still wrestling with this idea of stepping back. There's a part of me that thinks I'm not doing enough, that if I'm not involved in every single detail, the whole thing will fall apart." Grimes reached across the table and took his hand. "You know, you're allowed to let go sometimes. You've built something incredible, and now you have people who can carry it forward. You don't have to be in the trenches every moment. What matters is your vision, not your ability to do it all." Elon looked at her, his mind caught between the life he'd led and the one he was trying to build. "But if I'm not constantly pushing for more, does it all lose its edge? Am I losing the passion that got me here?" Grimes smiled, a little sadness in her eyes. "Passion isn't just about pushing forward, Elon. It's about finding meaning in what you're doing and who you're doing it with. You're not losing your passion. You're learning how to channel it differently." Elon absorbed her words. As always, she had a way of cutting through the noise, of helping him see the bigger picture. It wasn't about losing his passion, it was about rediscovering the purpose behind it. In the days that followed, Elon found himself becoming more comfortable with his new role. He took longer walks with his children, spent more time with Grimes, and even took a brief break from his usual hectic schedule to visit the SpaceX launch site. The shift wasn't immediate, old habits died hard, but the adjustments were slowly taking root. However, as much as Elon had shifted his perspective, the world around him didn't always adjust so quickly. There were still those moments when the relentless pursuit of progress threatened to drag him back into the chaos. One such moment came when Tesla faced a significant setback in the production of their latest electric vehicle model. A key supplier had failed to meet a critical deadline, which caused a ripple effect that threatened to delay the entire project. Elon had always been a master at navigating such crises, but this time, the pressure felt different. It wasn't just the financial and operational consequences, it was the emotional toll of being pulled back into the whirlwind. He found himself in an urgent meeting with Tesla's production team, the room heavy with tension. "We're behind schedule," the lead engineer said, his voice strained. "And if we don't make up for lost time, we could face serious delays." Elon's fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, the old instinct to take charge kicking in. "What can we do to fix this? Is there any way to expedite production without compromising quality?" The team began brainstorming solutions, and as they spoke, Elon felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. He was already deep into problem-solving mode, thinking through logistics and contingency plans, when a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're going to burn yourself out again, Elon," Gwyn said, her tone gentle but firm. "You can't do it all. We'll fix this, but we need to approach it strategically, not just with urgency." Elon turned to her, frustration bubbling up. "We don't have time to be strategic right now. This needs to be handled, and we need to act fast." "Strategic doesn't mean slow," Gwyn replied, her voice unwavering. "But it does mean thinking ahead, considering the long-term impact, not just the short-term fix." Elon stared at her, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. It wasn't the first time she had challenged him, but this time, something clicked. The need to be constantly in control had become an obstacle, not a strength. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been trying to do too much myself. We'll fix it, together." That night, as Elon lay in bed, he reflected on the day's events. The setback with Tesla was significant, but it wasn't the end of the world. He had a team, people who were just as committed to the company's mission as he was. He had built these teams to be resilient, to solve problems on their own. They weren't just cogs in a machine, they were leaders in their own right. For the first time, Elon realized that the strength of his companies wasn't just in his own vision, it was in the collective efforts of the people he trusted. As he drifted to sleep, a sense of peace settled over him. The world would keep turning, with or without him being at the center of everything. And that was okay. The ripple effect of his decisions, both personal and professional, had already begun to change the trajectory of his life. And while there would still be challenges, Elon Musk was beginning to understand that the greatest legacy he could leave wasn't just technological, it was the people who had shared in the journey with him. Tomorrow would bring more obstacles, more breakthroughs, but for now, he was content. He had finally learned that in order to build something lasting, he had to first ensure that the foundation beneath him, his relationships, his health, his peace of mind, was solid. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Elon's newfound sense of balance was still fragile, like the delicate gears of a clock finally working together after years of being out of sync. Despite his progress in learning to trust his team and let go of the constant need to be in control, there were moments when the weight of his ambition bore down on him once again. The expectations surrounding him, of his family, his companies, the world, were immense. He had always been someone who thrived under pressure. For years, he had built an empire out of the relentless drive to reach the stars, both literally and metaphorically. But now, as he took a step back to reflect, those very expectations seemed to take on a different tone, less like a motivator and more like a weight, pushing him downward, threatening to crush him if he couldn't find the right balance. One afternoon, as Elon was sitting in his office at SpaceX, his phone buzzed with a notification, a reminder of a critical meeting that was fast approaching. The latest figures for Tesla's quarterly production had come in, and they were underwhelming. The markets had been volatile, and his competitors were pushing ahead in ways that felt almost reckless. Another challenge, Elon muttered to himself, his fingers tapping absently on his desk. The pressure was building again, and despite everything he'd learned in recent months about slowing down, the old habits were hard to ignore. The door to his office creaked open, and Gwyn stepped in, her expression unreadable. "Elon," she said, her voice calm yet firm, "we need to talk about Tesla's production numbers. We're going to have to pivot." Elon didn't look up from his desk, his mind racing through possible solutions. "What do you mean by pivot?" "We need to find a way to manage expectations," Gwyn said, sitting down across from him. "The numbers aren't great, but we're not facing a disaster. We have options, but we need to think about this strategically, not react impulsively. If we keep pushing without recalibration, we risk everything." Elon clenched his jaw. He had been here before, caught in a cycle of urgent decisions, always reacting, always striving for perfection. But he was tired. Tired of the constant push, the unrelenting demand to deliver more, faster. "I don't know, Gwyn," he said, his voice low. "I feel like no matter what I do, it's never enough. I've been pushing for years, and it feels like I'm not getting anywhere. The world is expecting more, and it's too much." Gwyn's expression softened as she leaned forward. "Elon, you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. But you don't have to. You don't have to shoulder all of it alone. We're all here with you, remember? You don't have to be everything to everyone." Her words resonated with him. In the past, he had always been driven by the fear of not doing enough, of failing those who depended on him. But now, he wondered if the real failure wasn't in trying and falling short, it was in the endless pursuit of more, without ever acknowledging the cost to himself. "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time in weeks. "But what if it's not enough? What if I can't fix it all?" "You don't have to fix everything," Gwyn replied gently. "You've already changed the world. That's more than most people can ever dream of. But it's okay to be human. It's okay to step back, to let go, and let others carry the load with you." Elon didn't answer at first, his mind racing as he absorbed her words. The pressure was a constant companion, always there, always demanding more. But perhaps, for the first time, he was beginning to see that his worth wasn't tied to his ability to be everything all at once. He finally looked up at Gwyn, his gaze steady. "I don't know how to stop. How to let go. But I want to try. For once, I want to see what it feels like to step back." Gwyn smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "That's the first step, Elon. You're already doing it. The rest will come in time." The next few days were a blur of meetings, media appearances, and updates on the production setbacks that were still reverberating through Tesla. Elon found himself pulling back more and more, not physically, but mentally. He had always prided himself on being the one to hold everything together, the one to have all the answers. Now, he was learning to trust that the answers could come from others, too. During a meeting with the Tesla leadership team, where discussions centered around how to streamline production and ensure the company didn't miss its targets, Elon felt a shift. It wasn't just that he was listening more, it was that he was truly present, not just as a figurehead, but as a partner in the decision-making process. He let others speak first, let them propose solutions, and instead of jumping in with his own ideas, he asked questions. "Why do you think this approach will work?" he asked one of the senior engineers. "What are the risks, and how do we mitigate them?" The engineer, a woman named Claire, hesitated for a moment before responding, but then she explained her reasoning in detail, pointing out potential pitfalls and offering solutions. Elon found himself nodding along, impressed by her expertise and confident approach. After the meeting, Claire approached him. "I've noticed a difference in you lately, Elon," she said, her voice tentative but warm. "You're giving us space to lead. It feels different. In a good way." Elon smiled, something inside him shifting. "Maybe I'm learning to lead differently," he said. Maybe I'm finally realizing that it's not about doing everything myself. The conversation stayed with him for the rest of the day. As he walked through the factory, observing the production lines, he noticed how much smoother things were running, how much more cohesive the team seemed. There was a collective energy now that hadn't been there before. Elon realized that the tension that had once plagued the company, the pressure to constantly do more, faster, had started to lift. It wasn't just about Tesla or SpaceX anymore. It was about the people who had believed in his vision and who had made it their own. It was about creating a culture where they could thrive and lead without being constantly under the shadow of his demands. Later that evening, after a long day, Elon returned home to Grimes, who was sitting on the couch, holding their child in her arms. As soon as he walked in, she looked up, a soft smile playing on her lips. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice light, as though the weight of the world wasn't on his shoulders. Elon sat down next to her, exhaustion seeping into his bones, but there was a sense of calm in the air that had eluded him for months. "It was different," he said, his voice slow. "I didn't feel the same pressure to fix everything. I let the team take the lead more. It felt good, like I could actually trust them to handle things." Grimes nodded. "That sounds like progress." "I think it is," Elon replied. "But I'm still trying to figure out how to keep this balance. It's easy to slip back into old habits." "You will," Grimes said with a gentle smile. "But remember, progress doesn't happen in a straight line. It's okay to have setbacks. It's okay to make mistakes. What matters is that you're trying." Elon leaned back, the weight of her words settling in. He had always been someone who pushed himself to the brink, who believed that failure was something to be avoided at all costs. But now, he was starting to understand something different. Failure wasn't the end. It was just another part of the journey. And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt as though he was finally on the right path, not just as a businessman, but as a man who was learning to live, love, and lead with authenticity. Tomorrow, the pressures would return, the expectations would mount, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But for tonight, Elon Musk allowed himself to rest, knowing that, for once, he was not defined by the weight of those expectations. Elon woke up early the next morning, the sunlight spilling through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft golden hue. It was still too early to check emails, to scroll through the endless notifications from his teams, but he felt a strange sense of calm that made him pause. There was a difference in the air, something that hadn't been there in years, an unspoken promise of change. As he got up and dressed, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. The weight of expectations had been there for as long as he could remember, pulling at him from every direction. His family, his companies, the media, all of them had looked to him to be the visionary, the risk-taker, the person who could make the impossible possible. It had shaped him into someone who rarely rested, someone who couldn't afford to stop moving for fear of falling behind. But now, in the stillness of the morning, Elon felt as though he was stepping into a new version of himself. One that didn't live in constant pursuit of perfection, one that recognized the importance of balance and, more importantly, the value of connection. He made his way to the kitchen, where Grimes was already awake, sipping coffee and reading a book. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a quiet smile. "Morning," she said softly, her voice still heavy with sleep. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a while," Elon admitted, joining her at the table. "I think I've finally figured out something important." Grimes raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's that?" "That progress doesn't have to come at the expense of everything else," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with a newfound clarity. "I've been chasing after this impossible idea of always being the one to do it all. But I'm realizing that success isn't just about the outcome. It's about the journey and the people you share it with." Grimes smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "You're starting to see the bigger picture, aren't you?" Elon nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "I think I am." The shift in Elon's mindset wasn't just an internal realization, it began to permeate the way he approached his work. As he sat down with Gwyn and his leadership team later that day, he noticed a difference in how the conversations unfolded. There was a new energy in the room, an openness that hadn't been there before. It was as if the team had finally realized that Elon wasn't going to bulldoze over them with his relentless ambition. Instead, he was allowing them to lead in their own right. "Elon," Gwyn said, her voice steady but confident, "we've been looking at the numbers, and we have a plan to address the production issues. But we need to talk about our long-term goals as well. The next phase of Tesla's growth is going to require a shift in our approach to innovation." Elon leaned back in his chair, absorbing her words. He had always been the one pushing for the next big thing, the electric car that would change the world, the rocket that would take humanity to Mars. But now, he understood that innovation wasn't just about big leaps forward. It was about continuous, sustainable progress. It was about doing things in a way that allowed for long-term success rather than short-term glory. "I agree," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to think beyond the immediate challenges. We need to ensure that everything we do contributes to the bigger picture. I want to focus on what happens after we reach Mars, after we've created the first fully sustainable city on Earth. How do we make sure the world is ready for that next step?" The room fell silent as the team processed his words. They had always known Elon as the visionary, the man who thought about the future in ways no one else could. But now, it was clear that he was thinking even bigger. He wasn't just interested in the next big breakthrough, he was focused on building a future that could last. "We need to think about infrastructure," one of the engineers spoke up. "If we're going to sustain life on Mars, we need to build self-sufficient systems, from energy production to food sources. But we also need to think about how that knowledge can be applied here on Earth." Elon nodded, impressed by the team's foresight. "Exactly. It's not just about getting to Mars. It's about creating the technology, the systems, the partnerships that will make life on Earth more sustainable, more efficient. We need to be thinking decades ahead." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that Elon wasn't just participating in the conversation, he was facilitating it. He wasn't the one with all the answers anymore. Instead, he was guiding the discussion, encouraging his team to think critically, to challenge each other, and to come up with solutions that weren't just about pushing the envelope, but about ensuring that progress was something everyone could share in. That evening, after another full day of meetings and brainstorming sessions, Elon returned home. He was tired, but it was the kind of tired that came with knowing he had done something meaningful. It was a tiredness that came with growth, with pushing past the old habits and embracing something new. Grimes was sitting on the couch again, her legs tucked underneath her as she scrolled through her phone. She looked up when Elon entered, her face lighting up with a smile. "How was today?" she asked, her voice warm and inviting. "It was good," Elon said, sinking into the chair beside her. "I think we're getting somewhere. The team is really stepping up. It's starting to feel like we're all moving in the same direction." "That's great to hear," Grimes said, her eyes soft with pride. "I've always believed in you, but it's nice to see you believing in them, too." Elon smiled, his heart swelling with a sense of gratitude he had never truly allowed himself to feel before. "I'm starting to realize that it's not just about what I can do. It's about what we can do together." Grimes placed her hand over his, her touch gentle but reassuring. "That's the most important realization you can have, Elon. You're not alone in this. And you don't have to carry it all." As the days turned into weeks, Elon continued to adjust to this new way of thinking. He wasn't perfect, and he knew that the old habits would still rear their heads from time to time. But he was learning to step back, to trust, and to embrace the idea that progress wasn't just about the destination, it was about the journey and the people who traveled with him. For the first time in his life, Elon Musk wasn't just looking to the stars. He was also looking to the people around him, the ones who had supported him through every failure and every triumph. And in doing so, he realized that the true measure of his success wasn't the companies he had built or the rockets he had sent to space, it was the lives he had touched along the way. And perhaps, in the end, that was the most meaningful innovation of all. Tomorrow, the challenges would still be there, but for the first time in a long while, Elon felt ready to face them, not alone, but with a team that believed in the same vision and a family that reminded him of what truly mattered. The weeks following Elon's decision to let go of some of the pressures that had dominated his life were marked by small victories, subtle shifts in how he worked, how he interacted with others, and most importantly, how he thought about the future. Still, for someone as relentless as Elon Musk, finding peace was not an easy task. It was almost as if there were an invisible pull that tried to drag him back into the whirlwind of expectations and urgency. One such day, as he walked through the headquarters of SpaceX, his thoughts were a swirl of competing priorities. His team was advancing rapidly on the development of the Starship project, but there were concerns regarding some of the materials they were using, and recent delays had shaken his confidence in the timeline. The engineers were optimistic, but Elon couldn't help but feel the old pressure rising again. Mars was the goal, the driving force behind so much of his life's work, but now there was the new realization, even Mars couldn't be rushed. His mind flickered back to that conversation he'd had with Gwyn. She'd been right. He didn't have to do it all alone. And yet, every time the pressure mounted, he felt the tug, the desire to dive back in, to fix it all, to be the one to push the boundaries and prove that the impossible was always within reach. As he approached the conference room, he saw Gwyn standing with a few other engineers, their heads bent over some papers and diagrams. He hesitated for a moment at the door, his hand resting lightly on the frame, before pushing it open. "Elon," Gwyn greeted him with a warm smile. "Good timing. We were just going over some projections for Starship. Things are looking promising, but we need your insight on a few things." He walked into the room and took a seat at the table. "What's the status?" he asked, trying to focus, but his mind still racing. "Well," one of the engineers began, "we've made significant progress on the material testing. The prototype is showing promise, but there are some issues with the propulsion system. We'll need additional testing before we move forward with the next phase." Elon nodded slowly. He understood the science behind it, but part of him wanted to rush through it, to skip over the careful evaluations and move straight to the breakthrough. The tension was familiar, the familiar drive to do more, faster. "Is there a timeline for resolution?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of impatience. "We're looking at an additional 6 months of testing, but we want to be sure before we make any big moves," the engineer replied. Elon clenched his jaw. The timeline he'd set was quickly slipping away. He had always thought of time as a resource to be conquered, but now he understood something different. Time was not just an enemy. It was a factor to be worked with, to be respected. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling of urgency. "I understand," Elon said, keeping his voice steady. "But what are the risks if we don't proceed with caution? We can't afford another delay." Gwyn raised a hand, signaling the engineers to pause. "Elon, I know this is frustrating, but we've learned the hard way before. Rushing things only leads to more problems down the line. Remember when we pushed too fast with Falcon Heavy? We nearly had a catastrophic failure. If we take our time now, we avoid bigger setbacks in the future." Elon took a deep breath, recognizing the truth in her words. He was on the brink of understanding something critical, something that would define his future approach to not just SpaceX, but to his entire life. Innovation was not just about speed. It was about precision, collaboration, and, most importantly, patience. "All right," he said, his voice calm, "let's move forward carefully. Let's not cut any corners." The engineers nodded, relieved that the pressure had eased. There was a palpable shift in the room. Elon had listened, had allowed them to take the lead. It was a subtle change, but one that felt monumental. That evening, after another round of intense meetings, Elon found himself walking through the quiet streets of the SpaceX campus. It was a beautiful, starry night, and as he looked up at the vast expanse of space, something stirred deep within him. The stars were far away, distant, but they had always represented more than just a celestial body. They represented the future, the unknown, the next frontier. But now, standing there, Elon realized that space wasn't just out there, it was also in here, in the present. The space between moments, between decisions, between people. The quiet moments, the pauses, the spaces that allowed things to unfold organically. In his relentless pursuit of progress, he had overlooked the value of those spaces. Elon, a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Gwyn walking toward him, her expression thoughtful. "Hey, Gwyn," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "What's up?" "I just wanted to check in," she said, her tone softer than usual. "I saw your expression in the meeting earlier. You're still carrying a lot on your shoulders, aren't you?" Elon didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up at the stars again. "I think I'm starting to understand that I don't have to carry it all," he said slowly. "It's strange, though. The pressure, it feels like it's always there, lingering, waiting for me to take it on again." Gwyn nodded, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "It's not easy to let go of something that's been a part of you for so long. But the hardest part is realizing that the pressure doesn't have to define you. The future doesn't rely on you alone." For a long time, Elon had been driven by a fear of failure, by the idea that if he wasn't the one pushing forward, no one else would. But as he stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the SpaceX campus, he understood that the real power lay in collaboration, in trusting the people around him, and in knowing that the future was something he could build with others, not just for them. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, updates, and decisions, but something had shifted within Elon. He was still deeply involved in the progress of his companies, but now, he was also learning how to step back, to let his team take the reins. He wasn't always the one with the answers anymore, and that was okay. As he returned to his home that evening, Grimes was sitting on the porch, a soft breeze ruffling her hair. She looked up as he approached, her smile serene. "How's it going?" she asked, her voice gentle. "It's better," Elon said, sitting down beside her. "I'm starting to see things differently. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm realizing it's not just about getting to the finish line, it's about how we get there. Together." Grimes took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "It's a big shift." Elon smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Yeah. It is. And for the first time, I'm ready for it." The stars above them twinkled brightly, their distant light a reminder of the vastness of the universe. But tonight, Elon Musk understood something that had always eluded him: the future wasn't just about reaching the stars, it was about navigating the space between them. And in that space, there was room for everything he had always longed for: success, love, collaboration, and growth. Tomorrow would come with its own set of challenges. But for tonight, Elon felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had finally learned to embrace the space between the stars. The change Elon had been slowly embracing over the past few months was undeniable, yet the journey toward this new version of himself was far from simple. Every day brought a new realization, a new opportunity to reflect, to grow, and to adjust. Yet, as much as he sought peace, the weight of responsibility never fully lifted. It clung to him, like a shadow that, no matter how far he walked, refused to leave his side. That morning, as he sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters, he looked out of the window at the sprawling campus. The company had grown beyond what he could have ever imagined in its early days. But with the growth came new challenges. There were always problems to solve, innovations to push forward, and new horizons to conquer. Elon's mind raced as he prepared for another round of meetings. However, this time, he felt different. There was a level of clarity that had come with his new understanding of leadership, one that emphasized collaboration over control. He wasn't going to carry the burden alone anymore, and that realization had lightened the weight on his shoulders. He was deep in thought when Gwyn walked in, her presence filling the room with a sense of calm. "Elon," she said with a smile, "ready for today's round of meetings?" Elon looked up from his desk, smiling back. Yeah, I'm ready. Actually, I've been thinking. Gwyn raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Thinking about what? About how we approach these projects, Elon said, his voice steady. It's not enough to just be innovative anymore. We need to make sure we're building a culture that supports long-term sustainability, both in our work and in our people. I think we've been pushing so hard for progress that we've overlooked the fact that we're building the future of the world. And if we're not careful, we could break it. Gwyn nodded, understanding immediately what Elon was getting at. That's a big shift, but a necessary one. You're right. We need to make sure the systems we're building aren't just innovative in the short term but sustainable in the long term. If we want the future to be one that actually works, we have to start thinking about the world as a whole. Elon smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle in. For so long, he had seen the future through the lens of achievement, success, speed, and the glory of accomplishment. But now, for the first time, he saw the future through the lens of responsibility. The projects he was leading were not just about advancing technology. They were about changing the world for the better, making sure that whatever they built could stand the test of time. As the day unfolded, Elon met with the teams at both Tesla and SpaceX, focusing not just on their technical advancements, but on how those advancements would affect people, the communities, the world at large. The conversations were no longer just about products, they were about creating systems that could evolve and adapt, ensuring that progress didn't come at the cost of the environment, society, or humanity's values. There was something almost revolutionary about these discussions. In the past, the conversation might have been dominated by charts, figures, and predictions. Today, it was about the future of people, of the planet, and of the legacy they would leave. Elon could feel a change in the room, in the energy of the people around him. They weren't just working for him anymore, they were working for something greater. They were working for the world they all shared. At one point during the meeting, an engineer named Sarah spoke up. Elon, this shift in our focus is important, but it's going to take time. We can't expect immediate results. We need to build a culture of innovation, but also one that's grounded in humility, patience, and long-term thinking. Elon paused, looking around the room at his team. He could see the sincerity in their eyes. This wasn't just about profits or recognition, it was about something deeper. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't leading a company anymore, he was leading a movement. You're right, Elon said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. This is going to take time. And it won't always be easy. But it's worth it. We're not just creating the future for us, we're creating it for everyone. And that means we have to make sure we get it right. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of those words hanging in the air. Elon felt a sense of pride, not in the accomplishments of the day, but in the fact that he had allowed himself to embrace a deeper sense of purpose. Later that evening, as he walked through the halls of his home, Elon's thoughts drifted back to the conversation he had had with Grimes a few weeks ago. It's not just about getting to the finish line, she had said. It's about how we get there. Together. He had heard her words, but it wasn't until now that he truly understood their meaning. The journey was not just about pushing himself to the edge. It was about the people around him, the connections he made, and the impact they could create when they worked together. Grimes was in the living room, playing softly on the piano. The sound of the keys filled the air with a peaceful, calming atmosphere. Elon stood for a moment, just listening, feeling the weight of the day start to fade away. The music reminded him of something important, that despite all the work, all the pressure, there was always room for peace, for creativity, and for connection. When Grimes finished the piece, she looked up, catching his gaze. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice light but filled with care. "It was different," Elon said, sitting down next to her. "I think I've finally started to see things for what they are. Not just the companies, not just the technologies. But the people we're doing this for. We're all in this together." Grimes smiled, her eyes softening. "I'm proud of you, Elon." You're learning to see the world in a way you never have before. He sighed, leaning back. It's a strange feeling. Realizing that the future is bigger than just one person. But it's also kind of freeing. It should be, Grimes replied. The world is changing, and you're a part of that. But you don't have to carry it all alone anymore. Elon's gaze turned thoughtful as he looked out the window, the setting sun casting a warm glow across the room. The world was changing, and so was he. He had spent years building companies, launching rockets, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But now, he understood that true progress wasn't just about the next big idea, it was about the connections you built along the way, the relationships you fostered, and the impact you left on the people who walked the journey with you. And for the first time, Elon felt a sense of peace knowing that the weight of change didn't have to be his to bear alone. The future was still waiting for him, but this time, he was ready to meet it with humility, patience, and, most importantly, the knowledge that together, they could make it all happen. As the night fell, the stars twinkled outside, a reminder of all that lay ahead. Elon Musk wasn't just chasing the stars anymore. He was building the path to them, one step at a time, and this time, he wasn't walking alone. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new obstacles, but for tonight, Elon knew that he was exactly where he needed to be, on the journey, with the people who mattered, building the future together. The days that followed brought more clarity, but also more challenges. Elon had opened his eyes to the idea of leadership, not as the solitary pursuit of personal glory, but as a shared responsibility, a collective effort that required him to trust others, to be open, and to let go of the need to control every aspect. It wasn't easy for him, his mind had always been a labyrinth of ideas, goals, and an insatiable drive to achieve. But there was something freeing about this new perspective. Still, old habits die hard. As the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, the demands never stopped coming. There were board meetings, investor calls, product launches, and the relentless push to advance technology. The weight of it all was still there. And sometimes, despite all the efforts to embrace patience, Elon felt it creeping back in. One morning, as he stood in the middle of the Tesla production facility, walking past the rows of electric cars being assembled with precision, he felt that familiar urge to push harder. Faster. Better. Yet, in that moment, a voice inside him whispered, "This is not the way forward." Elon paused, his eyes scanning the factory floor. His team was busy, but there was something different in the air today, an energy that felt lighter. Perhaps it was the sense of collective purpose, the realization that the company was no longer just about innovation for the sake of it, but about creating something sustainable. Something that would leave a lasting impact on the planet. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Gwyn. "Lunch at noon. There's something important I want to discuss. It's time to talk about the future beyond Mars." Elon felt a flutter of curiosity. Gwyn had always been the pragmatic one, the grounded voice of reason in his whirlwind world. They'd both spent years working toward the goal of colonizing Mars. But the way she had worded the message made him think that perhaps the conversation would take a different direction. At noon, Elon found himself in the conference room with Gwyn. As usual, she was calm, collected, her mind always sharp and analytical. Elon sat across from her, his curiosity piqued. "So," he began, "what's this about? The future beyond Mars? I thought Mars was our endgame." Gwyn smiled slightly but didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Elon, we've both been obsessed with Mars for so long that it's easy to forget what the mission is truly about. It's about securing humanity's future. The Earth is vulnerable, and we need to ensure the survival of our species. But what if the true answer is not about escaping Earth, but about fixing it? What if we stop focusing on leaving and start focusing on healing?" Elon blinked, taken aback by the question. "Healing Earth," he repeated. "I've always believed that Mars was humanity's backup plan, a way to ensure that we would survive if Earth became uninhabitable." "And that's still a part of the vision," Gwyn said, leaning forward. But what if we shift our focus from leaving Earth to preserving it? Imagine if we put as much energy into saving the planet as we have into creating a backup. What if, instead of expanding into space, we used the technologies we're developing to restore Earth's ecosystems? What if we led the way in reversing climate change? Elon sat in stunned silence for a few moments. He had never considered this perspective. It was radical, perhaps too radical. But as the words sank in, he realized that there was a deep logic to it. All his efforts to push humanity to space, to develop technologies that could take people to Mars, were about preserving humanity. But maybe it wasn't just about saving humanity, it was about saving Earth, the very thing that had sustained them all along. "You're suggesting a radical shift," Elon finally said, his voice quieter than usual. "Not just in what we're building, but in our entire philosophy. You want us to focus on Earth first, rather than on Mars?" Gwyn nodded. "Not entirely. Mars is still important. But what if we started looking at the Earth as our primary mission, our immediate responsibility? Maybe we need to adjust our vision. We could focus on technological solutions that reduce carbon emissions, restore biodiversity, and make our world more resilient to climate change. The same technologies we're developing for space exploration could be adapted to make Earth more sustainable." The weight of the conversation settled on Elon. For so long, he had been driven by the belief that humanity's survival depended on expansion into space. But now, here was Gwyn, asking him to rethink the foundation of his life's work. "What's the first step?" Elon asked, the spark of his relentless curiosity lighting up his mind. "How do we even begin to shift our focus like that?" Gwyn smiled, sensing the change in Elon's tone. "We start by applying the same thinking that led to the development of Tesla and SpaceX. We use innovation, we use data, and we collaborate with others. We build systems to restore ecosystems, to reduce waste, to clean up our oceans. We invest in green energy on a massive scale. We could even start developing technology for carbon capture at the global scale." The enormity of what she was suggesting left Elon speechless for a moment. It was a daunting proposition. But then, as he looked around the room, he realized that it was within his reach. He had always believed in the impossible. He had always seen solutions to problems where others saw only obstacles. What Gwyn was asking was no different. "This would change everything," Elon said, his voice gaining confidence. "Not just the companies, but the way the world sees us. It's not about colonizing Mars, it's about giving humanity the tools to heal its home. And we could lead the way." Gwyn leaned back, watching Elon's expression shift from contemplation to determination. "Exactly. We can change the narrative, Elon. We don't have to run away from Earth, we can be the ones to fix it." Elon left the meeting with Gwyn that afternoon feeling a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of the world, not as a burden, but as a responsibility he could shoulder. The idea of saving Earth, of using his companies and technologies to heal the planet, felt like a deeper, more meaningful goal than anything he had worked toward before. As he walked out of the building, he pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Grimes, "We need to talk. I think I've just had the most important conversation of my life." The future had always seemed like something distant, something to be reached through ambition, through breakthroughs. But now, it seemed much closer. The future wasn't just about reaching new frontiers, it was about transforming the one we already had. And as Elon Musk stood there, looking up at the sky, he realized that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to let go of your past vision, to embrace the new, and to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to accept that there might be another way forward. Tomorrow, they would begin the work. It would take everything he had, but for the first time, he felt truly ready to meet it. As the sun began to set, Elon knew one thing for certain: the stars weren't the only thing worth reaching for. The planet beneath his feet was just as precious, and now, it was time to protect it. The dawn came quietly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The early morning light filtered through the windows of Elon's home, casting a soft glow over the room. He sat by the window, watching the sun slowly rise over the horizon, feeling the weight of everything he had learned in the past weeks. The journey he had started, both personally and professionally, had led him to a place he hadn't expected, one of humility, of shared responsibility, and of profound understanding. The world was changing, and so was he. Elon stood up and walked over to the desk in his study. His phone buzzed again. It was another message from Gwyn, as it so often had been during this time of transition. She had become more than just a colleague, she had become a guide, a friend, someone who had helped him see the bigger picture when all he could see were the details. Let's get the team together today. It's time to present the vision. The world's waiting for us to lead. Elon's mind buzzed with thoughts, ideas, and possibilities. For years, he had been pushing the envelope, breaking barriers, and creating companies that transformed industries. But now, the challenge ahead was different. It was no longer about reaching for the stars. It was about saving the planet, restoring balance, and showing the world what real leadership could look like. Today was going to be the beginning of something new. At Tesla's headquarters, the conference room was filled with key members from both Tesla and SpaceX. They were all present, gathered together in anticipation of what Elon was about to unveil. Some of them had worked with him for years, others had come along more recently, but all of them shared one thing in common: they had been inspired by Elon's vision. As Elon entered the room, he could feel the weight of their gazes, the expectation in the air. But there was something else, too, a sense of hope, a feeling that something bigger was about to unfold. This wasn't just another product launch or business strategy. This was a turning point, both for Elon and for the world. He stood at the head of the table, looking around at the faces of the people who had joined him on this journey. His heart beat faster. This wasn't about ambition anymore, it was about legacy. Everyone, Elon began, his voice steady but carrying the gravity of the moment, we've built something incredible. Tesla has changed the way the world thinks about energy. SpaceX has proven that we can make space travel a reality. But the world is changing faster than we ever thought possible. We're at a crossroads. We can continue to push the boundaries of what's possible, or we can pivot. A murmur went through the room. Elon paused, letting the words sink in. This was not a typical pitch. This was a call to action. I've realized something recently, he continued. What if we stopped looking at the future as something to escape to, and instead focused on the world we already have? What if the most important thing we can do isn't to build spaceships, but to heal the Earth? The room fell silent. His words hung in the air, powerful and unsettling. The silence was broken only when Gwyn, sitting near the back, spoke up. Are you saying that the mission is changing, Elon? That Tesla and SpaceX will no longer be about the grandiose ideas of Mars and beyond, but about Earth and sustainability? Elon nodded, his gaze unwavering. Exactly. Mars will still be part of our mission, but the future we should be working toward is one where we restore the planet we call home. We have the technology, the resources, and the teams to lead the way in addressing the most critical challenges facing the world today: climate change, environmental degradation, and resource scarcity. The conversation was charged with energy, each team member processing the weight of what Elon was proposing. For years, they had followed his lead in the race to the stars. But now, the race was not to leave Earth, it was to save it. We'll focus on sustainable technologies at scale, Elon said, his voice picking up speed. We'll accelerate the development of electric vehicles, invest in renewable energy infrastructure, and scale carbon capture technologies. And we will use everything we've learned from space exploration to restore ecosystems and fight climate change. The room erupted with energy, but it wasn't chaos. It was a wave of realization and excitement. This was the challenge they had all been waiting for, one that would define their legacy. We're not just changing the world, we're healing it, Elon said, a small smile playing on his lips. And we will do it together. The meeting continued for hours, as the team discussed the details of this new direction. Elon, Gwyn, and others mapped out the framework for how they would integrate this new mission into their ongoing projects. There were conversations about technology, partnerships, investments, and policy, but above all, there was a unified sense of purpose. They weren't just building products anymore, they were building a movement. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had always believed in the impossible, but now he believed in something even greater, the power of collective action and shared responsibility. When he returned home that evening, Grimes was waiting for him, a soft smile on her face. She had been by his side through every twist and turn of his journey, and now, more than ever, he needed her presence. "How did it go?" she asked, sitting beside him on the couch. Elon looked at her, his eyes reflecting a calm he hadn't felt in years. "It went well. We've set a new course. We're going to focus on healing the Earth, not just reaching for the stars." Grimes smiled, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. "I'm proud of you. I knew you'd find your way." Elon sighed, a weight lifting off his chest. "I've realized that the stars are important. But Earth is the only home we've got. And if we're going to reach for the stars, we have to make sure we're doing it in a way that doesn't destroy the home that gave us life." Grimes took his hand, her voice soft. "It's a big task, but I know you're the one who can do it." Elon nodded, staring out the window at the night sky. For the first time, he saw it not as a destination, but as a reminder. The world below him, Earth, was the true frontier. It was the only place he wanted to build, to protect, and to preserve. And tomorrow, they would begin. As he stood up and turned to face Grimes, he knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but it would also be the most important one of his life. The future, the real future, was no longer just about rockets and electric cars. It was about restoring the balance, healing the planet, and creating a world where future generations could thrive. He smiled at her. "We're not just going to change the world. We're going to save it." And with that, Elon Musk walked into the new dawn, ready to lead not just the world of innovation, but the world itself, toward a brighter, more sustainable future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?